What's up guys, Garrett McLaughlin here. In the video today, I want to speak about the split squat exercise, aka the stationary lunge, why it checks so many boxes, and how you can fine tune that exercise to really address your specific needs to see really good results with your running. First and foremost, if we just run through what the split squat is, split squat, like I said, stationary lunge exercise. So I usually like to start in that lunge position, front ankle under front knee under back hip, and then we're simply going through that stationary lunge position as opposed to stepping or going forward into a forward lunge or reverse lunge. We're essentially staying stationary in our position and then driving up and lowering back down to the ground. A couple key things of when you break down this exercise specifically, I think a lot of people were always only focused on getting in position and doing the movement. If we think about our individual exercises, there are so many little pieces or components to these that, depending on our weak link, whether it's lack of range of motion, lack of stability, lack of strength, hip strength versus core strength, we can really tweak and kind of change the dials here, turn the dials to some degree to really get better emphasis on those areas where we struggle individually. And the split squat is one in particular that you can really fine-tune quite a bit. First and foremost, and we think from a running standpoint, big toe extension is super important. So is hip extension and push-off. So if I'm someone that has limited range of motion in those positions, doing the split squat can actually help us improve range of motion to a degree. First, starting below at the big toe, toes in this lunge position, all lunge positions, that back foot needs to get into a degree of extension. So you look at my toes are extending into the floor. I'm getting big toe and lesser toe extension. So if I'm someone that has limited range of motion there, just working on kind of sitting back into those toes, going through that lunge position, could be really good to help loosen up those joints there throughout the feet, improve range of motion, and reduce some type of stiffness. From a hip standpoint, like I mentioned, hip extension, which is that push-off or extension type motion through the hip joint. The smaller my stance is, the less degree of hip extension I'm in. So if I want to work on increasing or improving my hip extension, I can simply lengthen my stance. It's going to shift a little bit more stress into the hips as opposed to the knees. And you can see the further I get into the stretch out position, the more this knee is actually behind the body to a degree, as opposed to underneath. So if I want to improve hip extension, I could do my hip mobility exercises, my hip flexor stretching, and all of that. And then as I get to the split squat, I'm going to adopt a slightly longer stance, and that helps me as I go through here, really work on the lengthening of the quadriceps, the rectus femoris, the hip flexor, getting that hip into extension to then improve range of motion. So those are the two things I look at from a range of motion standpoint with the split squat: big toe extension and also hip extension. Vital movements and ranges of motions that we need to actually run properly with good mechanics. So that's where we can fine tune the split squat depending on if there is any limitation in those positions. The next thing to focus on is the single leg stabilization component. So when you're in any type of lunge position, I'll show you from the front here straight on, because I'm in this staggered stance, I need to control my body from a stability standpoint side to side, right? I'm gonna have this type of sway or tilting type motion there if I'm losing stability. We always tell people, make sure that knee is aligned, right? Knee is aligned with the second toe, maintain good stability there in the leg, and that's what we focus on. That stability and alignment really comes from the foot, the ankle, the hip, and the pelvis. If we're using those areas properly, that knee's gonna naturally align on its own. So rather than always focusing on what is that simple cue to maintain good alignment, really focusing on, is that foot, do I have a nice wide base? Can I spread my foot and keep good contact with the ground? So as I'm in my lunge position, I'm not overly rolling in, I'm not overly shifting out, because you can see what happens. If my foot rolls in, my knee comes in. If my foot rolls out, my knee goes out. So by controlling the foot, I naturally dictate the position of the knee. Then from a hip standpoint, we have hip internal rotation, adduction. We have hip external rotation, abduction. If I can maintain good control in that neutral position, that's when I better align the knee. As we go further up and we look at position of the pelvis, if my hand is straight across my pelvis here, and this is usually why I start actually with a pad as opposed to on the ground, and I don't go super low into these split squats because we lose that levelness throughout the pelvis. But if we go through our motion, we can see there is a degree, right? The pelvis can tilt in that frontal plane, right? In this position, I'm on my right leg, my left side pelvis is dropped in relation to my right side. Here, If I can lift up that pelvis, now I'm staying more level. Naturally, with the level pelvis, stable hip, stable foot, we get good alignment throughout that single leg to then execute that exercise well. So it's quite a bit to focus on from a single leg stability standpoint. Foot and ankle, hip, and also pelvis, and that kind of dictates the position of the knee. I think this position, if we think about running specifically, we're gonna naturally, it's a single leg bound from one leg to the next. So as we strike the ground and we land and we absorb force, that stability has to happen first. If we don't have stability, it's really hard to absorb shock and stress into that position. Those tend to be the people that land a little bit harder with more impact. So if we can really use the stabilization component, get in a good position to be really stable, good balance, good stability, and own that position, that's when we can have better disperse force so it doesn't naturally create as much force as we come down and strike the ground. The next thing is just naturally, from a running standpoint, majority of injuries happen in that shock absorption phase of running. So if we look at, like I said a second ago, you land and strike the ground, that's where that initial contact, whatever you want to call it, all these forces as the foot hits the ground are coming up into the leg, usually landing and striking into the heel, coming up into the shin, into the calf, the knee, hip, towards the lower back, right? It's an impulse of force up into the lower extremity or lower limb. So if we can naturally put ourselves in a position where we're mimicking that initial contact, right? As we land, the foot is out in front of the body there. The leg is out in front of the body. The hip flexed, the knees flexed, the ankle and the foot are ready to handle and distribute force. This is more so the position of our landing. So naturally, if we can strengthen this position, teach our body how to have the muscle mass and the stability and the control that when we're in that position where our foot strikes the ground, we can better distribute the force through these nice strong muscles. We're less likely to become injured because we're stronger and more resilient. So that's where if we go through that position, that stationary lunge position, we're doing a good job as we focus on that front leg in particular to really isolate where our leg is going to be distributing force as it lands slightly out in front of the body. The next thing is, we look at the split squat. How do we want to load this thing, right? Over time, yes, starting with the body weight one, getting the position, the stability, the alignment, work on getting stronger in that position is important. That's the foundation or the first step. Second step is making it harder over time. So if we're just focusing on using weights, not doing different exercise variations like rear foot elevated split squat, single leg squat, lunges, those types of things, if we just focus purely on the split squat itself, we can do something as simple as starting, I'll show you from the front, goblet position, using a single dumbbell or a kettlebell in front. If we're in that position, the weight's in front of us. This actually helps us load our front leg to a greater degree. The weight is shifted forward over that leg. This leg is gonna have to work a little bit harder, the quad, the knee, and some of those muscles on the front side of the leg, right? That's the first way we can load the split squat. Second way we can load the split squat is with a dumbbell or kettlebell on each side. This is going to be a little bit more well-distributed loading pattern. So if I have the weights on either side of me, I'm going to load kind of everything equally, but it also provides the side-to-side sway. So we talked about stability being super important in the beginning. Stabilizing the foot, stabilizing the hips, the pelvis, and also the core, because as these weights, and naturally I'm going to kind of rock around a little bit side to side, as I lower down into my split squat, all of those areas are going to have to stabilize that sway of the body to then make this movement harder. If single leg stability is something you struggle with, after you master holding and completing the exercise with 2 dumbbells or 2 kettlebells, you can go to a single dumbbell or kettlebell. This might actually be less weight overall, but because there's a tendency for that weight to pull you only to one side, the stability component or the need to stabilize that lower extremity increases significantly. So, for example, here, my right leg is forward. I need to use my right hip, right side core to stabilize. If I hold a kettlebell or dumbbell in one hand, is going to be that tendency for it to pull me down here. All of these muscles on this right side need to shorten to maintain good alignment of my spine, hips, and pelvis, and then I can complete that same exercise with a single weight. I could do the same thing on the other side if I want to keep it this way. Now here, right, this is gonna pull me down to the right side. My left side needs to engage to maintain good alignment. It really depends on what you're looking to get from the exercise, what your weaknesses are or limitations, and you can really fine tune and address that with the weight. I have a lot of people where they're always leaning to one side. They have poor stability and it's very specific. So as they complete the split squat, they naturally always want to lean this way. They're always rotating, rolling out on the outside of their foot. Their body is shifting to that side. So what I can do in that situation is either provide a kettlebell on this side to act as a counterbalance to then balance them out to a better degree. Or sometimes, if you do the opposite, you actually accentuate the problem. I could add a kettlebell or a weight on this side, which forces me more recruitment to stay upright to prevent myself from being pulled there. This just depends on the person and how they respond, and with some of the one-on-one personal training sessions, we're able to really fine-tune to see, okay, what improves that limitation or dysfunction we're seeing. So those are some thoughts here in terms of the split squat. Highly recommend the exercise. I think it's one of the best lunge, slightly single leg. Obviously, you're still in a split stance position, but more weight is distributed on that front leg, so it becomes more of a single leg exercise than the traditional squat. And it can create tons of value from a single leg stability standpoint, a strength standpoint, core stability, and then you can kind of fine tune some of these smaller details just to make sure you're addressing your weak links as best as possible. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop a comment below and reach out directly if you want to talk any more about the split squat. Thank you.